Ron Kinsley, John Righeimer, Stacy Hessel, Tom Duffy, Dale Schleter. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Number 3 is pledge allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Number 4, certification compliance with open meeting laws.
This meeting has been noticed to the public and news media as required by section 19.84 of the Wisconsin statutes.
Thank you. Number 5, the meeting agenda is set. And number 6 is public comment. We have 2 people that submitted papers for public comment. Lori Martin, you want to go and state your name, please, and your address?
Can you hear me? Okay. Lori Martin, Winter, Wisconsin, N6291 Clover Spur, Winter, Wisconsin. I'm the president of the Waldo Community Center. Waldo is run by volunteers and funded by donations. We want to keep it that way. We have provided many activities and services to the community thus far. Southern Sawyer County is still underserved in many areas. We at Waldo want to expand our services to serving meals to our area community members 3 days a week. We also want to subsidize class materials and offer more activities. We've applied for a grant to help fund appliances and upgrades, but we need your help for the rest. Many of our residents have voiced the opinion that too little of their tax dollars are invested in their community here. We're requesting $25,000 from the county to help us fulfill our goals. I know that our community will be thankful for your help. We're reasonably assured that we have the funding in the works for kitchen appliances in order to cook our own meals. Now, we would be serving meals 3 days a week. We're open Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then we would package frozen meals for people to take home if they wanted Monday and Friday, Saturday, whatever. We have volunteers that are going to do this right now, and there's no employees. So the monies would be used to purchase food and any cooking, pots, pans, whatever we need to comply with serving food. And you have any questions, anybody?
Yes.
Is this the same request that you made during budget time?
Yes, but it's altered because we have applied for a grant to fund the appliances that we need. So it's a lesser amount. And
So, and then are you you're a nonprofit, correct, separate from the county?
we're a 501c3 nonprofit established in September of 2022.
So I think that there's rules against us giving to nonprofits, but I could be wrong.
Thank you, Lori.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Linda Zomer.
Good morning, Linda Zilmer, resident of the Village of Birchwood, Edgewater property taxpayer. And my public comment this morning is on your agenda item number 12, the elected officials wage review. Following what Washburn County has just adopted last month with their wages, they broke out their salaries between the constitutional duties and then additional duties. And I would imagine here in Sawyer County that these offices do things above and beyond what are statutorily required. So Washburn County had that discussion, what if whoever's elected is unwilling or unable to do those duties? And so they have broken out separately it's about $3,000 a year that they estimate that their positions. And they also did more positions than Sawyer County. You're only doing 3 this year. So when you get to that agenda item, would you maybe talk about why you're only setting those wages for 3 positions, and also how you are handling the non-statutorily required duties in the figures that you have? Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody online, Lynn? Thank you. Number 7, approve the minutes of the previous meeting of February.
I'll second.
Motion by Mr. Duffy, second by Mr. Rickheimer to approve as presented. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Number 8, Finance Department report. Sales tax.
All right, well, starting with sales tax, after kind of a down January, the February settlements came in about 25% over last year, very high. That would be reflective mostly of December activity. It put us back above track for hitting budget. But again, this early in the year, it's really hard to predict what we're going to end up at, but at least it's better news than we had last month. Any questions on that? Moving on to budget performance for 23. Really the only activity, there's some minimal other things, but mainly I booked the surplus transfers to other funds since last month. So if you look at page 4 of the first one here, down at the bottom, the general fund revenue and expense, the expense does include those transfers now. Just to refresh your memory, we sent $500,000 to resource development for future dam repairs. We did $450,000 to highway to get their cash flow in a better position. And then the final one was $150,000 to the courthouse project to cover basically the issuance costs on the 2 debt issues that we did. So we're still in good shape. We pretty much have everything done now. We cut off paying invoices as of February 29th. If we have any come in, we can still do a journal entry to put it back to 23, but we're hoping that's pretty much done. There will still probably be some small revenues coming in, some of the grants that haven't been paid yet. Other than that, we're pretty close to closing the books. If you look at highway, there's quite a net income now that is including that transfer of $450,000. And I've booked the transfer from CIP in there. What is not booked yet that we get from the auditors is the depreciation expense. So that will get us down to about where we will need to be to net out so that they're in a good cash flow position. Any questions on 23?
Yeah, I do, Mr. Chairman, real quick. Mike, what kind of money are we saving because of this type of winter we're having? I mean, the plows are not out, we're not salting, or the manpower, overtime.
We're saving on overtime, definitely.
Okay.
There's not as much savings as you might think because we already had to pay for the salt and sand for the year. So they're sitting in our sheds already. The staffing, we pay whether there's snow or not, but yes, we're saving on any overtime for Friday or weekend snowfalls. Unfortunately, the stuff we've had, a lot of it's been on the weekend. I think we had 3 main occurrences and I believe all were on the weekend. But we've had to do some salt and sand just because of freezing, even if there wasn't some snow.
Then I got a question on the new courthouse, but I could wait until you're on that part of the budget.
All right.
Okay,
Just
thank you, Chairman.
also, we always order salt ahead of time and we have salt coming with limited space to put it at. So we have these big state sheds. We're piling in them state sheds. But remember, we're not rolling out them trucks every day with a snowstorm, which is $1,200 a load. Thank you.
Moving into 24, we're really early. 17% of the budget is done as of February 29th. On the revenue side, we haven't seen much come in any department yet. So overall, we're at about, well, it shows 13%. If I net out the the fund balance draw, which I'm hoping again, we won't have to do. We haven't had to do it the last 2 years. That would put us at 14%. And then the other thing that I had the sales tax number, we hadn't actually received the check, so that's not booked yet. That would put us at about 15%. So it's still running a little behind budget, but nothing to be concerned about at this point, this early in the year. With the expenses, we're running at 18%, which looks a little high. But the one thing two things we do, we pay out a lot of our community partnerships in January. And also we fund all of our HRAs in January. So that does put us a little ahead on the expense side, always at the beginning of the year. Human services, not much revenue has come in yet. That's typical because they're so grant driven. There's always a lag between the time you file the grant. Well, first you spend the money, then you file the grant claim, then you get the money. So there's always a month or two delay there. The expenses are running fine for this time of year. Highway, we're actually doing okay with revenue and our expenses are good. You know, part of it's probably due to not having to put out as much money. But any questions on 24? Early second month look?
Chairman, real quick,
Yes.
have we seen any savings at all now with the building of this second courtroom and what we set out to do in our mission, to provide court services without all these pre-sentence incarcerations and costs of the jail?
I don't
And I
have
know
an
Mr.
answer for
Duffy's
that
been
yet.
driving that forever.
Yeah,
Are we seeing anything yet or is it too early to tell?
that's something I don't know yet. Do you have any data, Andy?
We don't have any data, just that the court calendar is being balanced out now. And it's too early to call it that it's happening, but there has been a small shift in the incarcerations where there's the more sentenced inmates. Those have gone up a little bit and the pre-sentenced have gone down a little bit, but we're talking like 2 percentage points. But that it took 6 months just for them to get the kind of cases assigned and get the court calendar balanced out, but people should be moving through the system quicker, which would lead to more, probably not any less time in the jail. It's just that they'll be in the jail for their sentenced time rather than pre-sentence.
How about assignments of our judges out of county? How many?
Yeah, they're both starting to get cases out of county. I believe at either public safety or CJCC, they said they have about 10, 11 cases each now outside the county. So we're having less visiting judges as well, because we're taking more with our own judges.
All right, moving on to CIP. We did have a little activity in February. We had purchased a forestry truck in January and we did some work on that, got a new bumper and winch and some Sauter County logo and make it look like one of our trucks. Same with the sheriff, we got a logo and some lettering. A little bit of camera work at the courthouse for IT. Maintenance is getting a new roof on their building. We paid for that. I believe that's the second half of that expense. And then the sheriff did get 2 squads. I believe those were both Durangos. Any questions on that? Moving on to kind of that second half of designating some surplus that we talked about last month. Number one, assigning sales tax. So this is not a transfer to another fund. This would be going from unassigned fund balance to assigned in a sales tax account. What our hope is that we've been seeing a trajectory of sales tax where we've been over budget. We're hoping that continues, but in case it doesn't, what we want to have is its own fund balance there in case we do in a year not hit our budget goal. So that's what that would be for. And then the second one is, again, within Fund 100, the general fund, assigning ambulance a fund balance. Last year, we had a loss of about $3,500. This year, we actually came out quite a bit ahead. So what this will do is set up a fund so that for 25, we will under levy by that amount so that the net is zero. So that would lower the tax burden in the future years, along with some of the stuff we did last month. The 500,000 to resource development would take that off of CIP in a future year. So trying to be fiscally responsible where we can, where we have some surplus, and keep taxes down as much as we can. This would take action if you chose to do that.
Ms. Ethel,
Make a motion to approve the resolution to designate general fund balance as noted.
I'll second.
motion by Ms. Ethel, second by Mr. Ringheimer to approve the fund balance with changes. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Next is the construction update. I'm gonna start on the cost side. So the total approved cost was $10,325,000 and some change. It's made up by the different color blocks there, starting with the Myron contract. The original amount was 8.6 million. There were some change orders that we added into that to come up with just under 8.8 million. Out of that, we've paid 8.747 million, which leaves a balance to finish of 43,581. We actually just got a credit back. The Myron portion is closed out. We had about 21,000 left in contingency. So that's a credit back. So we, instead of paying out 43,000, we're paying out about 22,000. So it's a little bit of good news. Beyond the Myron contract, we had a little over 23,000 in legal fees to set up everything. Design fees were 650,000 and owner items 860,000 to come up with that total. The sources we've used to pay for this are again in color blocks. The 22 bond issue was a face amount of $8 million. We had issuance costs of just under 80, which left a net of 7.92. The 23 note issue, the portion of that attributed to the courthouse was 737,000. Issuance costs again. I did take all the issuance costs out of the courthouse portion. There was also the paying off the state loan for that property we purchased in December of 22. There was CIP for 24 or 3 and CIP for 24 that we did in there. So there are 4 portions of that. I did take the issuance costs off of this. We also, if you recall, by the time we issued that debt, you can only go back 90 days to recover costs. We had some CIP purchases for 23 that occurred before that date, totaling 191,000. So that had to be added to the cost of the project because we took that out of ARPA money through the CIP. So a give and take there, the net was the same. So the net proceeds for the note issue were 866,000. Then moving on to ARPA, the resolution actually said 1.39 million. The intent, I believe, was whatever was left. So there's the 1.39, the transfer to CIP to cover those costs that occurred prior to the note issue, the 191,000. We had earnings on the ARPA money of about 46,000. So that I'm including in there because the intent was the rest of the money. That left net proceeds of 1.244 million. And then we've had interest earnings of almost 156,000 so far on the money. And then the balance from transfer from last month to cover those two closing costs. Come up with a revenue stream of 10,336,724, which leaves a surplus of about $11,000. That said, we do have some IT to wrap up. Part of it was the Kansas room that we just got up and going, and a couple other small things too. So in the end, we'll spend the money, but came out pretty good. Any questions on either expenses or revenue sources? Mr. Schuman.
Yeah, I guess I had a question. I knew we had transferred 150,000 from fund balance, right? For all of our
Yep.
change orders and,
It's really for the issuance costs that weren't, a lot of times those will be paid separately out of general fund so that you get the true amount. We hadn't done that, so it left us a little short from what we were intended to have.
so the 11,500 surplus we have, you think that's not a real number? Because of other,
It's accurate as of right now, but we will have one final bill for IT equipment.
where would you transfer that surplus then if we don't use it on the courthouse? Into a fund balance somewhere, or?
Probably the highway.
Well,
He's always pulling for the highway.
to keep with intent, I would probably put it against debt service repayment on the bonds that were issued for the project.
And where does all our interest money go on all our investments? Does that come into play anywhere in what you were talking about today?
The purple bar there is the interest earnings on the bond issues. So we were issued money, we invested it, had a drawdown schedule according to the project, and then those matured, paid the bills, but then any interest that we earned in that period is that purple bar.
Thank you.
Yep.
What does the legal fee represent there?
Those were early on, I'm sure, setting up the scope and the bond issues, contracts, all that kind of stuff.
Good job, Mike.
All right, moving on to number 9, the January investment report. Very similar to what we've seen in the past. I believe 92,000 is what we took in for the month of January. The balances are very similar to previous month and previous year, but another good interest-bearing month. I did just hear yesterday on the news that they are going to start talk about a rate reduction. So next month, I've said this a few months in a row, but next month will most likely be the month we come forward with a CD tier to lock in some rates while they're still up where they are.
We still have ARPA unspent funds?
The 46,000 I just accounted for in the construction project, so that'll be drawn out. The other 200,000 are a couple of the broadband that are still outstanding. Opioid, we've started to spend a little bit of money there. Some of our promotion work has been done. And then LATCF, we still have not touched. Any
Mike, is the
questions?
LATCF, are we funding anything in that? Do we have a budget for that?
We really haven't started discussing that. It
Is
would
there a
be,
time frame we have to spend it, or is that?
not really, and there aren't restrictions on it either. It's
Okay.
basically general fund money. It can go towards anything. What we would like to see is something that has some impact, more of a capital impact versus ongoing costs, because once it's gone, we don't have that revenue stream anymore. So it'd be more one-time expenditures we would use that money for. No other questions. Moving on to ambulance. We're looking at February to January now for the 12-month rolling. I'm going to talk a little bit about the aging report. I've been concerned on how it seems like there's an upward trajectory on the total amount, and even beyond that, the amount that's 120 days and over. So John and I set up a call with LifeQuest, and we did that about 3 weeks ago. And it was interesting, some good information. And one thing that I had noticed is the winter's kind of a bad period for whatever reason. I don't know if there are more calls or money's tight and the aging schedule seems to build up a little bit. The difference between this year and a year ago is we hadn't been with LifeQuest long enough to have that aging schedule towards the right side of this schedule. So that's the difference. The total amount is about the same, but the whole thing is shifting more because we've been with them long enough now. So that part helped a little bit. The one thing they stressed is they really don't like putting stuff to collections. They try as hard as they can to keep it on the aging schedule until they just really feel it's uncollectible. The reason for that is we pay 4.3% on all of these collections. Once it hits collections, it goes up to, 26%. So that's a big chunk out of the money. So we really want to keep stuff out of collections when we can. And one other thing I asked is if Medicaid, Medicare billing is carried at the full invoiced amount or at what we're likely to collect, and it is full invoiced amount. So since we're fairly high with Medicare or Medicaid billings, that's always going to overstate our aging schedule because a lot of that just isn't going to be collectible.
Mr. Schuman.
Any questions
no,
on
sorry.
aging? All right, so moving on to some of the numbers again. We've seen a big correction in our number of calls out, and now that's pretty reflective. That's been happening for 2 years now because the calls per month are pretty much the same. And you can see it was a step down from the previous 12-month cycle and a big step from the one before that. And, we've discussed this a lot. A lot of it is due to transfers, and we're working on that. Actually, Andy, if you want to touch on some of the work we've done, that might be appropriate.
Yeah, as far as trying to, two things. One is just adjust our staffing so it's more responsive to where our calls are. Not by increasing the number of staff, but just where they're working and the amount of people running a rig at a time. So it's not happened yet, but the plan is to move to still have a rig in Ojibwa, obviously, with 2 staff people, then 2 ambulances here in Hayward with 2 people. We've priced out adding another sleeping room at the garage here in Hayward so that there can be 4 people there. And then we'd have the ability to be available more often for transfers. One of the biggest reasons we lost transfers is not being consistently available. So by having those staff people here, it'll allow us to take transfers, but also be flexible. So if there's a transfer out and the Ojibwa ambulance gets put on a call, the second Hayward ambulance can reposition to cover the whole county until that second rig is back or the transfer is back. Or if there's just a Ojibwa ambulance is going to be on a transfer themselves, maybe they take somebody from Ladysmith to Marshfield, you'll be able to shift one of the Hayward ambulances down to Ojibwa then. So that's where we're headed and in hopes that being consistently available for transfers will get us called more often to do those. And not, 911 is obviously the priority. So that's why we want to have the flexibility to have that third rig up and running. And what we're doing is shifting. We had a power truck that was on part of the day. Then we had all-site ambulances with 3 staff people on to balance out their hours. So we're adjusting the schedules to get to three ambulances staffed with 2 people, still paramedic level.
Mr. Chairman.
Mike, I know the Wisconsin State Legislature recently approved that all-inclusive rate for Medicare, Medicaid. How will that affect our collections? Does that affect ambulance billing at all? Either of you know that?
That I don't know.
I have not heard about that or heard about how it applies to EMS.
It recently approved though, so that's huge for hospitals, clinics. I was just wondering whether it pertained to ambulance.
Yeah, it's something we can dig into a little bit. All right, so moving on to the billings. We talked about this last month. We are down a little bit from the previous year, and what we found out is we weren't getting all the stuff some of we could have been billing for. So we've corrected that. There was a system update with LifeQuest that'll help, and they're helping us. They did a staff training, which I discussed last month. I think that was in January, to help our staff not miss anything that we should be billing for. So that number should start coming up. The next one, this is where it starts getting to be better news. Our collections per month are up from the previous 12-month cycle. Still not quite where they were, but from the first slide, our number of calls are way down. So that would make sense that we're not collecting quite as much, but we're making good progress. There used to be quite a gap there, and we're really closing that. And then the next slide shows the percentage that we're collecting, and we are over 40%. Much better than the last 12-month cycle, not quite where we were 2 years ago. Our goal is 50. With how much we bill Medicaid, Medicare, we're probably not going to hit 50, but that's going to remain our goal, and we're going to strive to get towards that. And then here it looks at the amount billed and collected per call. And the billings per call are down a little bit, but the good news is our collections per call are the highest they've been since I started tracking this. So that's good news. The calls by township, again, it's kind of that concentric circle. Closer to the city of Hayward, the more concentration there is of the calls. Bass Lake close. Winters are, it's the biggest village other than the city of Hayward, so that makes sense that they would be up there as well. Some haven't had a call out yet. And then the income statement for ambulance, showing a net loss right now. It's early in the year, and we had a really bad January as far as collections too. So that has an effect on that. Any questions on ambulance?
Good job.
Oh, wait, I'm not done.
Ambulance is right off.
Forgot. 2 more slides.
Time's up.
Yeah. The write-offs here. So this is what since we've been writing off with LifeTouch or LifeQuest, this is where we're at. January was down a little bit from the previous months, right at our average. The green line is the average, running average, and the blue line is month by month. So we had quite a few months in a row there that were over average, and now we're right at it.
10 minutes ago, we have answered all calls.
Jelena, please.
I believe so. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, are you talking 911 calls that come in through our dispatch? Yes, we have to respond to all calls.
And those are all Medicare, and will cover all of those inmates. I mean, is there who's not paying? There's some have Medicare, some have Social Security, some have got insurance.
A lot of
Who
private
is it
pay.
paying?
I used to have that graph. Of course, I took it off this month. But it had listing by pay category of what's in the aging schedule. And a lot of it was Medicare. A lot, I think the number one by far though was private pay.
Okay.
So that becomes harder. And it's not that they aren't paying. They might be on a payment plan. So they stay on the aging schedule and then. So we'd rather take a payment plan like that than to put it to collections and get them on a payment plan that way, because then we're paying 26% versus 4.3. So they work very hard even to get on a payment plan if that's what it'll take for those private pays.
Yes.
Chairman, go ahead, Andy.
I'm just going, in one of the slides that Mike has is the calls by township. And John Fremmel also presents that to the Public Safety Committee. There's been a couple of questions on that. And I would just say it's done, or they're put together for our knowledge and board knowledge, but I would just say it's not 100% accurate. There's the calls come into the dispatch, the information is put in the CAD feeds our image trends, which are our billing software. So it all depends on that information getting in there correctly. So a lot of times, calls that come into Radisson could be town, could be the village. Same thing with Winter and Coudray, and then down in that area, some of those calls don't always get put into the right municipality. We haven't had them go back and clean that up because really it's only the two most important things are the call gets responded to and that the bill gets to the right person. Outside of tracking where it goes by municipality is more just for, inquiries or board knowledge. It's not part of anything that's really needed by the ambulance service. So they try to keep track of it, but it isn't, it should catch all the calls, but they may not always be put in the right municipality.
Yeah, Mike, does this new company, LifeQuest, do they work well with the tribe? I mean, because in the past we had problems with collections, for ambulance services. And I know Mr. Kinsey and I worked with that and we met with them. We had to get those two groups together so that IHS would pay for emergency ambulance service.
I don't have a lot of information on that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
There was one question John asked about that and I can't remember what it was now.
Just so you're aware of it. I mean, that makes a
Yeah.
big difference. Just the connections that can be made there, and then
Do you have a contact?
I do, and I'll get it to you.
Okay, that would help. Then the last slide then, this time is for real, and ambulances, it charges 2 collections, and they did put 44,000 into collections in January. So that was a bigger number. But we saw, there's quite a bit on that end of the aging schedule, so that would be why. Any questions on ambulance?
How many transfers do we get a month approximately? Do we know?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't know that one either.
Thank you. Pardon? Yes.
Airport master plan update. So last week, the public advisory group met with the consultants, and then Wednesday evening, the consultants held a public information workshop. That was the first, broad public interaction where the consultants presented their work to date on the, what we call chapters 1 and 2 of the master plan, as far as what's happening at the airport, the aeronautical activity. They got into some of the FAA guidelines and safety features, and then also presented their alternatives They're all preliminary based on the input they've gathered and the information that's available and the safety standards of the FAA. Their alternatives show, based on the traffic patterns we're seeing, where they think things could lead to. And I think the short story is that what they're saying is that, is the airport growing? Yes, it's one of the few that is, especially since the recession in 2008. A lot of general aviation airports have seen declines. Hayward's has not. It's not necessarily a tremendous increase in the number of operations, but it is an increase in the size of the airplanes and the speed of the airplanes coming in. So, without getting the technical specifications, we were getting B aircraft. There's different levels of B and the different levels of C. And we're starting to see some of those planes that were Bs switching to Cs. And so when we get into that starts changing the safety features that the airport would need to consider. We're not, 500 operations is the trigger, so to speak. And we're not there yet, but they say if the trend continues as it is, potentially in the next 10 years or thereafter, we could get above that point where the FAA would expect us as a sponsor of the airport to pursue upgrades to the runway, potentially the length of the safety, what they call the threshold or the flight patterns into the airport. So there was a very good turnout from the public, a lot of good questions, a good meeting overall to have that interaction and explain. The next meeting of their next public information workshop would be in the September-October timeframe. And then they'll take back all that final input and end up presenting the master plan to the board with a recommendation for the future. And then the board can take it from there as they wish. Most likely accept the plan, but you're not binding yourself to any of their recommendation or any of their alternatives that'll be in there. Probably looking at this time next year before you see the final, before the board would see the final master plan. Couple things that I mentioned last night to the Public Works that I anticipate, things that came up, that have been coming up with the public that we should expect to come up or address some questions is what the role of the county is as the sponsor of the airport. We're, if you look at the public records on land, we own the airport property and we are the sponsor, but we don't operate the airport independently. We're part of the FAA system, so we fall under the FAA guidelines for operations and safety. And I think if there's a really good article in the newspaper if you want to watch the meeting from last week. A lot of good discussion. That's all. The link to the YouTube will be on the Master Studies site. But the consultant gets into that a little bit. That we're not. It's if we get above these operations with these size of airplanes, there is some liability to the county as the sponsor for not pursuing upgrades to the airport to meet the demands of what traffic we're seeing. If there's not money available, though, the FAA provides money, which we've been using. If there's not the money from the FAA, that would be some reason for us not to pursue these down the road. And anything we're talking about in the master plan is not in the next 10 years. It's after that. It's down the road a ways. Just some of the alternatives I talked about would take at least that amount of time just to pursue. Once they give an alternative down the road, then there'll be an environmental review. If you're going to look at filling of wetlands, they have to go through that process. So this is the long game is what they're putting in the master plan. But definitely the role of the sponsor, ownership. The questions come up about, what have we agreed to with taking FAA money over the years? And we're getting, the short answer is we're essentially liable for those funds if we were to cease operating or want to go in a different direction. Relocating the airport has come up. I've asked about that and they reviewed that after the last master plan. And, basically Bureau of Air Access says that's not going to happen with FAA funding. If you want to move the airport, it would be on the county's dime because the FAA has so much sunken costs in our airport already. I think those are some of the things we'll just need to address questions for the public when they come up.
The question or the comment that came up a couple of times during that conversation was what is the economic impact of our airport? And so as a finance committee, can we take a look at, I mean, whether or not we do this, I mean, they're going to do the study, but whose responsibility is to say, this is how much the airport brings in annually to our community? A couple comments were made that some of the plane owners don't pay property tax here, but they definitely pay sales tax when they're here, and they buy fuel, et cetera. So I'm just wondering if we can look at that and be proactive for when that conversation comes back up, is what is the economic value of our airport?
We can do it on our own. I would suggest we look into the state's doing, and they've not done this before. This is new. The state is, Bureau of Aeronautics is contracted with, I believe it's in progress, but they were to be contracting with a consultant that was going to do an economic impact analysis for each of the airports in the state. So, I mean, we can,
And can we have that brought back to this committee and the Economic Development Committee? Both?
yeah, when that's ready, we'll
Okay,
definitely
great.
share it. I'll just get more information to see where they're at with that.
What Stacy said, I was gonna ask that as well, so thank you. So I want to make sure I'm clear. So if there are enhancements that are suggested to be done, and we make a decision to do so, we would not, the county would not pay that?
No, I mean, anything major that's gone on at the airport has been with federal dollars. It's on, somebody asked, maybe Stacy asked, how much we pay. And it's anywhere, if it's state money, which we don't use much of that, it's 80-20. Federal dollars, it's usually 95-5. In recent years, it's been 100% funded by FAA. There hasn't been a match required, but they're going back to usually it's 95-5-5, where the state pays 5, we pay 5%. There's been years it's been 95, 2.5. But anything major is done with FAA dollars. And that what the consultant was saying is that if we get above that operational level where we are having the bigger, faster planes and need to look at safety, as a sponsor and operator of the airport, we have liability if we're not trying to address that. But if the FAA cannot provide the money because it's their rules, then that would be some protection for us to not go ahead and make those changes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the other questions that have come up are who's using the airport, and we have some, I think, requests coming in for that. I think just one thing we would mention there is we have a list of tenants, of people who rent hangars. We have a list of aircraft that consider being based at the airport. We have to report those into the base aircraft system, but we don't necessarily keep a log of who's flying into the airport, which has also been asked. I mean, we can see tail numbers. A lot of times you look up those tail numbers, they're blocked, but it wouldn't be the practice of any airport to require people to disclose who they are when they fly in. We aren't a passenger airport. There's no manifest. So a lot of times we see the plane come in. Usually the plane's not in the name of the person that is flying on it. It's usually held by a holding company. So I think, if there was an expectation, we can tell people who's exactly flying in or out. We can't do that. We know who the major ones are, but not a complete list.
Andy, don't we put money in our budget for this match with the FAA funds? I mean, every year I think there's a line item, right, Mike, that we supply
Yeah, we
a
have
certain amount?
we have airport in the CIP, and then we forecast when the bigger projects are coming. So we have money in there for the match for those.
And one of the projects right now is resurfacing the runway that's coming up.
Right.
One of the biggest things I got out of the meeting the other night, we had on Wednesday night, was this is the plan for the airport. It's not a project. And he kind of explained the difference. Project is something different. Project is when you're going to do something. This is just a plan for us to overview. And I don't think a lot of people picked up on that. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Any project could be 10 years out.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Yes.
Question that I had also is, even if we don't go with any of their plan options, are we looking at expanding to making more hangars so that the county can make money in that avenue? Because right now there's no room for any more hangars.
Yep.
So can we look at that to where the county is making money on the hangar leases?
Right. That's actually good to bring that up, because I was going to mention that here at this committee, because there is some relevance to finance for the county. So like Stacy said, there is for, I don't know, for years and years, not been any space for additional hangars, and there is demand for those hangars. So I think the county, however many years ago, did you've redone your hangar leases and increased the amount that those individuals are paying as they come up for renewal because of the demand. And I think some of the alternatives that the consultants prepared could be more immediate than 10 years. They wouldn't affect like moving a runway, but they would limit your ability to expand the airport in the future or to move the runway in the future by putting hangars on the east side. So do we have any immediate plans or specific plans on the board to add space for hangars? We don't, because we're limited by available space. And we're still a year out from the alternatives, one of those being recommended, but the alternatives they showed had hangar development on the east side, relocating the runway or sliding the runway over to the east, which would open up more landside development on the west side of the airport where the hangars are currently. That would be 10 years plus out. But the relevance to us here is that we budget operating dollars for the airport every year. I think right now we're the net that's impacting the levy is less than 100,000. I think it's closer to 80,000. But the more sites, if we had sites available for hangars, the more private individuals could put hangars up, and we would collect additional lease fees. If we had more tenants, there's more fuel, which we get a percent of the fuel sales. So there is some relevance to the operational budget that if we had some of those things, we could lessen the levy impact of the airport on the county budget.
Any discussion about what willingness the DNR has with using the wetlands?
No, and that's what Mr. Kinsey was going with. Right now, this is a plan, so they might have a plan that has, and they did have alternatives that would put development into the wetlands. And you don't, well, there's two things. One is you wouldn't look at that. You set down what's the best plan for the airport based on the airport needs and, the neighborhood. If it's in the wetland, then you start going down the path of what it's going to take to bring that project to fruition. You're not going to, if the best alternative is to put the runway in the wetland, that's when you would start looking at how plausible it is to do that. The consultant also did say, though, he's not aware of any project that's ever been impeded because of that.
Does the DNR have a plan to say that they made the wetlands or?
In the case of this, I want to say yes, but it's also the Army Corps usually of engineers that has the final say. And usually it's going to involve mitigation.
The Namakagon River is right there, so it would involve the National Park Service.
Any other questions about the master plan? Hearing none, number 12, elected official wages and review, discussion, possible action.
Right, this morning I handed out an updated schedule of the comps, and they've shifted a lot. Since last month we looked at this, several counties have settled, and it went up about $7,000 per position. So we do have a new proposal that is tied to comps, but also tied to our pay schedule for department heads. So Andy, do you want to speak any more into that?
No, that summarizes where we're at. We brought this to you last month, but I asked for it to be pulled before the board meeting because we saw some trends in other counties were starting to settle on their wages. So we have two adjustments. One was we adjusted the wage to the 40-hour a week rather than 35 hours, and then brought it up from there to try to get it closer to the market. But also, did not go all the way up to the market because also conscious of what I would call internal equity, that we have a pay grid that we put other positions on, department heads. So we tried to plug it into that grid in an equitable spot relatively to the other positions in the courthouse. And then put it, the resolution shows the starting wage. And then a 2.5% increase annually from there. It is, I mean, it's a significant increase from where we were, probably because of the change in hours. And the overall cost is not subtle. It's the first year would be a total cumulative increase of 33,333, and then a little over $5,000 every year after that. But hopefully it keeps us in the ballpark of constitutional officers in the region or in similar counties.
And don't we set the wages for the clerk of courts and the sheriff also at some point?
We set them the year prior to their election. They're in a different election cycle.
And how many years do we set theirs at? Do you recall?
For their term. So that we set the clerk of courts they're both for 4 years, but they're on 2-year, they'll be in 2 years. It's every 2 years, different group.
Questions, concerns?
What does the color code mean?
The red ones have not settled, so it's still 24 salary.
The blue ones are the comparables that we're using.
Yeah. But the bars, there's a little legend right below the graph.
So that's just.
Mr. Leader.
Yeah, on our elected officials' salaries. I understand taking in other counties, what they're doing, but it's getting more and more, all of those jobs are getting more and more complicated. This upcoming election, it's increasingly taking up lots and lots and lots of time. We need to make sure that we have a wage that would allow us to hire people who have these abilities right off the bat. We can't afford to get somebody who will learn as they go. So I think we need to factor in that to this final decision.
Yes. Ms. Essen?
But they're elected officials, so, yeah, I mean, they're elected. So you have to go by their credentials that they're giving to their constituents, so it's not us saying like, this is what we're just assuming that they know what they're doing because they're running for election.
Anybody can run for election, whether they are qualified or not.
Correct.
But the point I'm trying to make is we need to attract people who are definitely able to step into the job the first day. There's always going to be some time lag there, but it's just something I feel we need to take into consideration. So we do attract more people to put their names on the ballot. Thank you.
And hope they have credentials. Because I see it as like, people are going to start looking at the pay and saying, well, I want to get paid this. And they're not looking at the job duties. So that concerns me. But otherwise, I'll make a motion to bring it to the full board.
I'll second.
There's a motion by Ms. Hessel, second by Ms. Righeimer to bring what was presented to us to the full county board for approval. Any other discussion? I think the wages are too low. And people have to go through a lot of training to get where they're at. Elections is absolutely a nightmare anymore. Put stuff together and you try to stay on top of the stuff. The register of deeds, Paul has been there a long time, and Takes a lot to learn that job. The county treasurer needs a lot. It's a big learning curve.
Starting point, and it's more than they were making before, so.
Here we have a motion and a second. We'll vote. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Next item. Number 13, 2023 legal fees by departments.
This was another one that I handed out this morning. How I broke this down, I've looked at it two ways. The top part is by department. The colors change to differentiate between the departments, and then the second chart shows by attorney or attorney company. One thing I want to say is I did this on cash basis, which means it's when we paid the bill. This was historically Sawyer hasn't broken this down. So I did kind of a quick brush, which still took about a day to pull stuff out. Cause right now it's almost all of it's in one, just our general council account. So I guess what I would look for is some direction from you, what you're looking for moving forward, so we can set up accounts accordingly. Whether you want it by department, or if I could add project codes within the general council to kind of break it down by department that way. Cause what I did is I went back and looked at every invoice, and they're not all easy to read, and some of them are very clumped. There might be 4 different departments in one line on a billing. So what we would like to do moving forward is spend the time on the front end, breaking it down how you guys want it, so that then I can just run reports after that.
Well, I'm the one that asked you to do that, and I thank you for doing this. When you asked me about 23, I could have went either way, but thank you. You said it took you a whole day. That's a lot of time to spend on it. I would like it broke down by departments, best you can, like going forward monthly. And I understand it's gonna lag behind a month or two, but I just want it to be brought to the board, the committees and the supervisors, to realize how much money we're spending on attorney fees. Because I'm not sure everybody realizes that. And to me, that's a big pile of money. And I think sometimes we don't have to. Or maybe we should be looking at bringing in-house attorney. I mean, that's a lot of money that would employ an attorney, but I also know you bring someone in, there's probably gonna be somebody right out of school. We talked about this in the past, and they're not gonna be specialized in every field. So if you had an in-house attorney, you still may have to use other attorneys periodically. Ms. Husson.
So I would like it based on project. I mean, I like the way that it is by department, but is it open records requests? Is that what's taking up all of our monies? Is it, somebody debating our rules? What is actually the cost here? Why are we paying so much? I like your idea, Chair, but I think that we also need to look at where is our money being spent? What is it being spent on? Who is it being spent on? I mean, I don't think that we have to be that specific, but it would be nice to know those kind of things, just because I think we owe it to our taxpayers to know whether we're really heavy in this area and why, or if we're really heavy in another area.
And I just was gonna, like Mike said, this is Mike took the time and kind of did a quick brush with it. So just a couple of things I was going to point out is it does say open records. There's just a few bills that were specifically, obviously open records related, but a lot of the other open records assistance we get is inside some of these departments, just so we're that. Von Briesen and Roper, just as an example, that's primarily HR, anything HR related. So they might do an open records for personnel file, but we may have had personnel issues in the department. Tom Duffy, TJ, actually it's listed under general government because that's where we bill it. But a lot of his work is commitments, things in mental health area, not generally general government. Usually you're associated with human services, so he's not really he's representing the county, but it's case specific to that area. Some of these others, like Mike Kelsey, Waterland Circuit Court items aren't even representing the county. They're appointed counsel, guardian ad litem, things like that. We're responsible for the cost, but it's not like they're representing, like they're not doing corp counsel work. They're doing different work. So, but yeah, if you have that direction, I think we can start setting something up so we track these on the front end rather than having to go back and go through bills.
Thank you for doing that, Mike.
Yep, you're welcome.
Does that help give you enough guidance where we're going?
It does, and that's what I was thinking. It's just, now we know, and going forward, we'll be able to do it that way. Because looking back, some of the stuff was over a year ago now, and unless it's like open records is a low number relatively. But I know, like Andy said, a lot of the other stuff was due to that, but I don't know it looking at the invoice necessarily. So that's something that Andy and I will sit down probably with each bill now and look through it and put it to what you guys are looking for.
Thank you. Fourteen, future agenda items. You do a good job of bringing stuff forward. We'll stay with that unless we learn something new. Correspondence, reports, conferences. You want to touch base on open house?
Last night's Public Works meeting, we did commit, I think, probably the best word, to a open house ribbon cutting dedication event for the newly constructed area on May 16th. So it'll be prior to the county board meeting that night. Time of the ribbon cutting, we put at 5:00. So we'll have setting up tours for the board and the public of the entire newly constructed area, doing a short ceremony and dedication of the building at that time.
Anybody else has any thoughts or comments?
I just wanted to applaud the county on the mandatory learning that was done last Wednesday. I attended 2 of the seminars. They were amazing. And I hope that all of our county employees got as much out of it as I did.
And I believe our administrator said he's gonna start plowing snow because he looks like that new truck they had out here.
Does it get taken home?
No. No out of color. All right, anybody have anything else? Hearing none, thank you kindly. Meeting adjourned.
You.
Good job.